Hello, beautiful, soulful woman, and welcome to another episode of the Empowered Woman podcast. We are on episode, 14. I'm fairly certain it's 14. And so to connect with me after the show or to read up about our beautiful guest for today, do make sure that you head over to the show notes at valeriana.com. And speaking of beautiful guests, I am joined by the wonderful Megan Koufos. And Megan is a wild-hearted mama, a wife, a modern medicine woman, a magic maker, a soul activator, an intuitive creator and divine channel who lives life to the beat of her own medicine drum and guides you to do the same. Through her own shadow journey of rebellion, disconnection, infertility, and then postnatal depression, following the birth of her children, Megan embarked on a decade-long transformative and healing journey, which brought her to a sacred place of remembering and reconnecting to her own inner magic and the quiet voice of her soul. She has a big-hearted dream of guiding a million hearts to rewild, open, and rise, and supports women to anchor their light, dance with their shadows, and remember how truly magical and powerful they are. To embrace their magic in the mess, and connection in the chaos, and sacred in the simple, and awaken to a deeper level of their own unique creative expression, soul gifts, magic, medicine, and divine truth. Through nurturing, support, and heart-holding, she creates a sacred container for those ready to remember, reclaim, embody, and integrate their wholeness, intuition, ancient wisdom, divine sovereignty, and live in alignment with their unique soul signature and multi-dimensional way of being in the world. Wow, that's beautiful. I love that. Oh, and even, oh my God, I love that so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for that amazing introduction. I'm like, oh, is that me?
I know, I always get like whenever I'm on podcasts, I always feel a little bit weird hearing my own bio because you're just kind of hanging out in the wings. You're just like, yeah.
Yeah, you're kind of like, oh, okay. Oh, wow. And I don't think you really stop to, like when we're on this journey, you don't really stop to, well, no, I don't think for me, I stop often enough to really let it sink in how far I've come and what I've done. So that was awesome. Thank you. It's really, really beautiful to be here.
I'm so glad that we're able to have this discussion, and there's so much that I know that we're going to dive into, and particularly we're going to be talking about shadow work and the beauty in the darkness and the real gifts that that darkness can bring for us. So before we kind of dive into it, I'd love if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit about your own journey and how you came to be on the path of empowering women through shadow work.
Beautiful. Before I had my kids, I was, in the corporate world, and I guess, my journey starts as a little girl, as a kooky, probably rude, very, very just wild and free little girl who would always make people laugh and make really inappropriate jokes at really inappropriate times. That was just me. And I was such an intuitive little thing. I was so connected to the earth, and as I grew up, I chose to be born into a family that perhaps wasn't as nurturing as, what I would have liked now. At the same time, I'm so grateful and I love my family deeply because I've done a lot of healing around that. But as I sort of grew and as I got older, I became disconnected from that kooky little wild side, that intuitive little girl that I was born as. And I started to be the good girl, and I started to do what other people wanted me to do. And I started to listen to what, people who I trusted, parents, teachers, other people in society. I started listening to them instead of listening to my own inner voice. And as I got older, I just became really disconnected from my truth and who I was. And the way that kind of came out was through, partying and taking drugs and really empty relationships and trying to find whatever I was seeking outside of myself. And Um, I'd always wanted to be a doctor. My dream was to actually be a doctor as a little girl. I just wanted to be a doctor. And I let other people's limiting beliefs of, well, you're not really smart enough, or, things like that, stop me from doing that. And so I went into IT. I did information technology, and I had an amazing job. I'd worked my way up in the corporate world, and I always had this sense within me that I wanted to do something else. I researched life coaching, and I looked at all this stuff, and this was back, this was back at the start of probably 2000, that I first had those little intuitive nudges to start looking at something different than what I was doing. And again, I listened to the people in my immediate circle saying, oh, there's too many life coaches who never make a living doing that. How are you going to do that? Like, it was just, so I listened. And so, I just worked happily in my corporate job. And I was lucky enough to meet my beautiful husband. And when, we got pregnant, my beautiful first son was born. And I can remember being at home with this baby and absolutely hating it. I was so disconnected. I was so tired. I was so lost at that stage, but I didn't realize that's what it was. And I was diagnosed when he was 8 months old. I was diagnosed with what they call, postnatal depression, which I now see as basically disconnection to my soul and my truth and my, my own inner wisdom. And that lasted, I then found out I was pregnant with my daughter. And my depression lasted all through her pregnancy. She was about 8 months old. And I can remember driving, and my little bubs were in the back. And I had this vision of just driving into the other side of the oncoming traffic and basically ending it all with my little bubs in the car. And it scared me enough that I pulled over and I just burst into tears, and I said, I don't want this anymore. Like, I'd never been religious, or I hadn't been brought up in a spiritual household or anything. I'd always had this intuitive feeling inside that there was something more. And I can just remember just sitting there going, like, looking up and going, I don't want this. I don't want to be this mum. I don't want to feel like this anymore. I just want this gone. I just want it gone. And I can remember I just cried and I cried and I cried and I cried. And then once I'd sort of pulled myself together, I got home, and that was all, that day. And the next morning I woke up and I just had this intuitive sense to walk. So I started walking. I would sometimes walk for 3 or 4 hours a day with my babies in the pram, just until I started to feel better. And then I started looking, I started listening to beautiful music on my, back then it was like an iPod, but whoa, this is how long ago it was. And then I started listening to audiobooks, and I started listening to personal development, and then I started listening to spirituality, and then I started getting to all this amazing stuff, conversations with God, like all this amazing stuff. And I'm like, oh, this is like blowing my mind. And I can remember that I was on, I just probably started on Facebook around that time, and I saw an ad for a spiritual development course just down the road from my house. And I don't know why, I don't know how, I just knew that I needed to be there. And I pulled up, and it was a house, and I'm like, okay, this looks okay. This is just looked nice. It felt okay. And I remember walking in, and I can remember the smell of sandalwood. My first teacher used to always burn sandalwood incense, and I can remember this beautiful smell of sandalwood incense, and I'm like, there was something familiar about it to me. And I walked in, and I just said, hi, I'm Megan. And I just remember my teacher going, oh, hello, welcome. And she gave me the biggest hug. She just like hugged me, and I felt myself kind of like immerse into her. And I was like, oh my God, this was so good. And then it was only, I say only 10 weeks, but during that 10 weeks was, I would say, when I really had my spiritual awakening. We did lots of meditations and things, and I would start seeing visions, and I would start, opening up all my beautiful psychic senses and my intuitive senses. And I was taken back to memories as a child of, my dad was an opal miner, so playing with like fossicking through all the rocks and stuff, trying to find opals and stuff like that, and how I was always really drawn to rocks and crystals, and I always remember that as a little girl I was always afraid of the dark. And then I started, so my journey has been ongoing. It's been ongoing of different teachers, of different modalities, of so many different things over the years. And I can remember when I started doing the shadow work, but like I said, I'd always been afraid of the dark. I'd been afraid because I was taught that the dark was something to be fearful of. The dark is where the ghosts and the ghouls and the monsters all reside. And that's what I believed. And I also felt like there was something kind of dark within me as well, like perhaps in a past life I'd done something really bad or something like that. And I can remember, just over the process of going into my shadow and reclaiming my shadow and really honouring that darkness. The reason that I was so afraid of the dark is because I have a really beautiful connection to spirits who have passed. And I could always feel them when I would go outside. I could feel them looking at me and I could feel them there. But part of what I'd done as a little girl was disconnected from that part of me. So because I wasn't acknowledging that part and acknowledging those gifts within myself, they were something that I feared. So when I started to really acknowledge that and reclaim that back, the dark didn't become as scary anymore. And there are times when it still does, I still feel like, oh, okay, hang on, what's going on here? And I'm like, okay, it's time to go deeper. It's time to go back into my shadow and look at what's coming up for me. But, and I always remember when I started shadow work, that was like the missing link, because I think in the spirituality circles, there's all this beautiful love and light and stuff like that. And don't get me wrong, it's beautiful love and light. But there's also the shadow side as well.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that now we're kind of coming into the fact that, we can have all this beautiful love and light. And the way that we create more light and the way that we bring more light through is by honouring our darkness, is by going in and reclaiming the parts of ourselves within our shadow that we have disconnected from and shining a light on them. And that's how we bring more light. And, I think a lot of the things that are happening on our planet right now are basically the shadow of humanity that is kind of being played out in front of us. And it's really confronting. And so we're going to keep getting those messages and we're going to keep getting those lessons and stuff until we get, go deeper into our own shadow and reclaim all these parts of ourselves. So that's kind of my journey.
Wow.
About where I've come and what I've done. And it's like I said, I truly believe that my depression was my gift. It was the greatest gift because it got me to really take stock of where I was in my life and be honest with myself that what I was doing wasn't what I came here for, wasn't what was on my heart. And so I think that depression is, so many people believe that it's a mental illness. I actually think it's a one of spiritual disconnection, of soul disconnection.
Yeah, energetic
that we are
sickness.
So disconnected from ourselves that we go down this path of absolute deep sadness because we're not being who we came here to be. So, and that was my beautiful gift, and I've always seen it as that. So,
beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think there are certain, kind of taboo topics, and I think that depression in general is one that has kind of different elements of shame attached to it. But to say, depression, particularly as a mama, saying that you weren't happy in your role as a mama, I think there's an incredible shame in that for women. And so for you to own that, and then, and also this whole idea, what I love about what you've shared is that I think that sometimes we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have an awakening. Like we think that life turns in a complete moment and we can spend a lot of time waiting for that moment. And sometimes it can happen like that, but from what I'm hearing in your story, it wasn't so much this moment where everything came together, or it was this moment where you're like, I am changing as of now. It was simply a gentle unfurling that moved at the rate that you yourself could. So you heard, as soon as you could connect to your whisper, you followed that, and then that would reveal the next step, and so on and so on. So I love that you've shared that. That's so powerful.
Thank you. And I think, that, I mean, at the time with motherhood, it did bring up a lot of feelings of shame in me, because I wanted nothing more than to be a mum. But at the same time, all of a sudden, we're thrown into this life of being at this, especially if you've come from the corporate world, or if you're used to being in control, and then you're just at the control of this little baby, and they don't sleep, and they don't, they just poop and eat and they cry, and you're like, oh my God, what am I doing wrong? Like, and, and I think now I can look back and go, like, it was such a beautiful journey and such a beautiful lesson. And it's really normal for us as mums to feel that way, I think. Like, and I think as mums, we get to talk about that more, and also with the journey, and that's what I always say. It's like, we don't say we're driving somewhere at night, say we want to go from one side of, Australia to the other side of Australia. We're only ever going to see like a foot in front of us with the lights. But we trust that if we keep going in that direction, then we're eventually going to get to the other side of Australia. But we're not going to see the whole way, because we'd just go, oh my God, that's too far, I'm not going there. Like, wow. So we just do it step by step. And that's, I did a beautiful channeled video today that was talking about this, and it was just about, we take that step, and once we take the first step, then we can see the next step, and then we can see the next step, and then we can see the next step. But and I fall into this trap all the time, but I want to know all the steps. I want to know, but like, how is this going to happen? And then it's like, well, come back and just take that first step. That's all you have to do. And then the how or the next step is going to be shown to you. So then you just take that next step.
Yeah.
And, I think that it can sometimes be that ego trap that we want to see the whole way. Like, we want to see it. And it just doesn't happen that way. But then when you get to somewhere, like for me, for example, 10 years, and I look back and I go, wow, I would never have done that if I knew that that's where I was going to go, because,
well, that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the thing. If we knew exactly what our life was going to turn out, we probably wouldn't take the actions to actually get to that outcome anyway. So we're kind of in the same boat. Either you're taking a step in any direction, just take a freaking step. But because at the very worst scenario is it's the wrong, inverted commas, wrong step, if there is such a thing, and then that's not the path for you, and then great, that at least removed one potential path, so you're one step closer. But I think that we can get into this paralysis of either needing to know the full outlay, and I do this, oh my God, I'm so bad for this as well in my business. Like, that's pretty much probably the only real area where I go into freak out and micromanaging. Is like wanting to know, will this result in this, or is this the right step to get this outcome? And you can spend a lot of time not taking any action.
Absolutely.
Because the path isn't meant to reveal itself. And, I'm sure, and I know this is definitely the case for me, and it may be for you as well, based on your journey, is if you knew exactly what that 10 years was going to turn into, you perhaps wouldn't have chosen that depression, or you wouldn't have chosen, the difficulties that path gave, but as a result, you wouldn't have gotten the benefit, you wouldn't have gotten the gifts. So exactly. There's a reason why we don't know the full plan.
Yeah. And I think, that this whole theory of being afraid of taking the wrong or the right path, I think when we can look at it as if there's no, there's just alternative paths. So instead of saying, okay, maybe you'll take the long way around, and that's okay. Or maybe you'll take one that won't go anywhere, and that's okay, because you can come back. Like, I think, and I think that kind of comes from childhood, where, we are kind of taught in school that, you've got to get everything right, and you've got to do it the right way, and you've got to do it this way, and you've got to do it that way. And then if we make mistakes, we're wrong, or we don't get a good mark, or things like that. So, we can grow up being afraid of making mistakes. And I think that, making mistakes, and I think it's just really acknowledging that, there are no right or wrong. There's just some perhaps are more effective than others, but hey, it's okay. It's just, I think, we can get so caught up in the mind that we just forget that we came here to experience life being human.
Yeah.
And part of being human is having fun and just being so beautifully grateful for all the amazing gifts, because I know that if, whoever is watching this, if, you're watching this, then you have a computer, you have a beautiful roof over your head, and you have all these amazing blessings in your life that we get to experience every day. And I think that is where the juice of being human comes from, when we can come back from that place and just have fun and just kind of go, like, this is, everything around us is not real. Like, really, let's be honest here. And we can just kind of come back to that place and go, okay, how can I play with this today? And how can I play with this today? It can just, it can just create a bit more of a lighter energy for it than getting so caught up in the steps and the how and the right or the wrong and not making mistakes and not wanting to fail. And this is totally a message for me as well, because I do it all the time.
Oh yeah.
I have not arrived yet. I am, not above this. Every single day it's that constant reminder. And that's why my kids are so amazing for that, because they remind you to have fun. They remind you of just the beauty in everything.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love that. And so we've talked a little bit about shadow work, but for anyone that's listening that isn't familiar with that term or really understands the ins and outs of it, can you just give us a brief dive into what shadow work actually is?
Yeah. So the way that I love to see shadow work is, imagine us as, a new baby, a little child born into this world. And imagine we are this big, beautiful castle. So this castle has all these open rooms, and within each room is like part of who we are. So there might be, like, for me, there was like the rude little girl, and there was like the kooky little girl, and there was the intuitive little girl, and like all these parts that make up me as a whole beautiful divine being. And then what happens is, as we start to grow and we start to experience life, we notice that room is maybe different to someone else's room. And we're not sure how to deal with that, or how to work through that, or whether that is okay. And so we close the door on that room. And then we notice that someone doesn't really like what's in that room, or they don't approve of it, or we get told off, or we get shamed, or we get ridiculed for whatever is in that room. And then maybe in this other room, we are told that it's inappropriate or something like that. And so over time, we start to close all the doors in our rooms of our beautiful castle, because we think that if we do that, then we'll be more loved, we'll be more accepted by society and by, the people around us. And then eventually we're left with this tiny little subset of what we once were. And all the doors that we've closed of all the rooms, they then become the parts of ourselves that we have disconnected from, and that then becomes our shadow. So basically what our shadow is the parts of ourselves that we have hidden away, that we have locked away, that we have disconnected from, because we, for one reason or another, decided that that's what was best for us, to be loved as a little girl. So shadow work is really about going into those rooms and opening the doors and having a look what's in there, and bringing that back to us, and bringing that back to be part of us, and acknowledging it. And that's when we eventually have all the doors open, which, I don't know if we ever will in this lifetime. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. That's when we become that beautiful whole divine being. And when I talk about wholeness, that is what I mean. For wholeness, it's really about honouring all the parts of ourselves that, we are and who we are. So it's kind of what I see shadow work like. I also I had a beautiful experience when I was doing my Reiki mastership, and we did these beautiful embodied like healing processes. And I was going into my womb area, and there was like this kind of gloopy cloud, this gloopy black cloud, and it wasn't actually mine. So in the gloopy cloud was, you know, the beliefs around the darkness is something to be feared and the darkness is something to be afraid of. And that's where all the monsters, and like I was talking about before, exist. And so when we were able to kind of clear that gloopy cloud and go through, I came to the edge of a beautiful dark forest with a little hut inside. And inside that little hut was what a lot of people would refer to as perhaps even a witch. And I know that might be like frighten some people, but she was alone in this little hut. And what I was guided to was that that was part of my inner wise woman. And we sat down and we talked about her and why she was in the woods and why, you know, she had all these things around her. And she said that the part of the reason that she was in the darkness is because she holds a wisdom so strong, so deep, so ancient, that she knew no one would come and disturb her, no one would come and hurt her, no one would come and try and take her wisdom away if she locked herself in that beautiful dark place, waiting for the day when we are ready to journey into that beautiful space, to reclaim her and to bring her back. And, you know, like we look at the things that happened centuries ago with the women and the witch hunts and things like that. And that was basically because women are so intuitive and powerful. Like, we are the creators of life. We create life. We birth life into the world. We help the dying pass over. We can do all these different things at once. Tend to the home, do the cooking, watch the children while we're doing the washing and we're picking the berries and all these beautiful things, because we have this intuitive gift that we can do all these beautiful things. And that was labelled as bad and wrong. And so that's when, you know, these gifts that we have, these beautiful gifts of intuition and these beautiful gifts of this ancient wisdom and womb wisdom and all these beautiful gifts became labelled as dark, and they became labelled as wrong. And so, you know, for us as women now, it's really about going into that beautiful space where we have placed our wisdom and we have placed our knowledge and we have placed that beautiful, beautiful, beautiful gift that we have of our own medicine, to bring it back into the current time and share it with the world, because that is what we are calling forth. And that's what I really see this beautiful shadow work as. It's not something to be afraid of. It's something that perhaps we put this part of ourselves in the darkness because we knew it would be safe, because we knew no one would go there until the time that we were ready to venture there and reclaim it and bring it back. So does that kind of explain what I see shadow work as?
Yeah.
I went on a bit of a tangent there.
No, I loved it. Oh my God, as soon as you said forest, I was like, yes. That's so, I absolutely love that, because I hadn't, as we were kind of talking, it sounds to me, and it actually feels to me now that I'm feeling into it for myself, that our shadow is the misplaced parts of our feminine. And if you even think about it in terms of the yin and yang energy, the feminine energy is the dark, and, you know, the masculine is considered the light. So, you know, and I'm very much like you. When I was young, I knew that I had a much more earth-based energy, and, you know, as I kind of journeyed down my own path, that led into shamanism and really exploring more of that earth connection. But I always thought that there was something wrong with that, you know, and I couldn't quite connect with, you know, the more fluffy bunny approach of, you know, just bubble it and, you know, send everything love, which, you know, it can definitely be powerful, but it can sometimes be lopsided and actually do us harm, because we're so busy trying to force the light to come forth. We're trying to force something, and not actually respecting the power and the lessons that lie in the shadow, that lie in the undiscovered, unexplored parts of the feminine that society dictates as, you know, inappropriate or wrong, or, you know, all of the kind of taboo topics that we as women encompass. Like, I know so many women that take a core element of themselves. When we think about feminine archetypes, like you're exploring the witch or the crone, you know, that wise woman archetype. And we hide, you know, that part of ourselves that holds the ancient wisdom, and we hide the part of ourselves that is the creatress, you know, the sexually empowered woman that takes what she wants, that wild creative element of us. And so that would definitely make sense that depression comes through as a more physical and emotional manifestation of that, because depression is depression. It's a forcing downward. It is a suppression. And if there's 4 primary female archetypes and we're denying 2 of them, no wonder we're feeling incomplete as women.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. That's amazing. I love that.
So that was just kind of, I just thought of that as soon as you said crone, so I'm like, I'll just go ahead and say that. But I'd love to know, when you talk about how would a woman even begin the journey of shadow work, because I think that deep down, no matter how much we may try to deny it or hide that part of ourselves, we all know that we have shadow. Like, we all know that we got shit going on some level, and unresolved stuff, unloved parts of ourselves that we're wanting to integrate in some way to restore ourselves to that place of wholeness that you mentioned. So what would be a beginning point for a woman that's wanting to explore that part of herself?
I love to take women through a beautiful process of actually meeting their shadow. So they go into their beautiful inner garden and you know, connect with their higher self. And then they go down deeper and imagine a place that has been quite neglected and that's dark and that, you know, might be a bit yucky and stuff, and they meet their shadow self. And then what they do is they go back up to their beautiful garden with their higher self, and they invite their shadow self to come up and to be with their higher self and just be embraced. And that is kind of that first place of going, okay, I'm opening to this work. And you know, other things that I love to do, and this is when looking at the positive aspects, which are sometimes really challenging for us. So when we see another woman doing some really beautiful things, but perhaps we feel a bit jealous, or we feel a bit envious, or a bit annoyed or something like that. Like, say we've got this woman who's you know, she's powerful and she's an amazing speaker and she's vivacious and she's just, you know, really sexy, and we're like, oh, like we're triggered like that or turned on by that, right? That's a sign to us that that's also in us, because whatever we see, you know, whenever we see something outside of us, you know, it's that beautiful mirror, it's that beautiful that we have that within us too. And so what I love to do is to get women to, or my clients, to write down 3 people they admire and 3 qualities of those people that they love, and then stand in front of the mirror and say that I am that. And that starts with the, you know, the beautiful affective aspects, the beautiful kind of light shadow aspects to get them started. So it might be Oprah, for example. I always pick Oprah. I don't know why, but I always pick Oprah. And, you know, maybe it's that, you know, she's an amazing speaker. She's a very, what's the word? What's the quality? Maybe it's present. Maybe it's just confident. Maybe it's, you know, eloquent. Maybe it's something like that, like one of those characteristics. And then what they do is they go into the mirror and they look at it and say, I am eloquent. And then they'll probably have their ego going on, no, you're not. Like, no, you're not like that. And it's just that continual process of recognizing what we see in other people as part of what we want in ourselves. And I'm going to share a really kind of personal story, because there was, this was probably about 5 years ago, and I used to work with a woman she was very sensual. She was very sexy, and she was very in her body and confident, and just this beautiful dance between the masculine and the feminine. And I was actually physically attracted to her. I'm married for like nearly 20 years, have 4 beautiful babies. I thought that I was as heterosexual as they come. You know, not that there's anything wrong with anything, but I started to question my sexuality. And it was this process of going, wow, isn't that interesting? Like, what is this? And it's like, I didn't want anything physical with her, but there was this energy of her that just used to draw me in. And I was like, oh, what is that? And then I started the process of reclaiming that within myself, like reclaiming my own sexuality and my own sensuality and my own, like, dancing with my masculine and my feminine. And I'm like, ah. And as I got more in tune with that, that attraction that I had to her dissipated. So, you know, and that's how we do it. It's just a process of really looking at, you know, we can also look at what confronts us with other people, because that's also another part of shadow work. And this is where it gets a bit, I'm not sure if it's completely cut and dry, but when we see people that confront us, so say someone is really rude, and there's something within us to go, oh, I just don't have any tolerance for rude people. Like, that's just, you know, and it's like, okay, if we can sit with that and we can really, you know, go in with and say, okay, well, where does this exist within me? Where does being rude exist within me? And it can be a really confronting process. And this is why shadow work is always best when you're starting out, to do it with a beautiful coach or a beautiful guide, you know, someone who's been there, who can guide you through the process, because it can get quite confronting at times when we start to go into the more not readily accepted aspects, if that makes sense. So, you know, and it's just about sitting and going and looking at that. I am rude, you know, and that can bring up some stuff in us. And it's like, and then we can go a bit deeper and we can come back into our body and sit in that, you know, where is that feeling when we say I am rude? Like, where is that feeling coming up for us? And then what we can do is we can go deeper into the body and we can have a look at what the wisdom, you know, the wisdom that the body is trying to share with us, and where we created that belief and where we disconnected from that part of ourselves. And so we can start going deeper in that way. But there's an amazing book called Debbie Ford was the I guess the pioneer of shadow work, I would say. So any of her books are amazing if you're just starting out with shadow work. I would highly recommend that if you're not at the stage of wanting to work with a guide or a coach or a mentor or anything like that. I'd definitely have a look at Debbie Ford's work, because she's got some really amazing books on the shadow that can just get you started in that process. So
beautiful, awesome, thank you. No, it's, yeah, I find it really is sometimes, because I love what you're saying there about taking ownership of the parts we're rejecting in someone else, because the only reason why we're triggered by that person is because we haven't learned to love the part of ourselves that's being reflected back to us. And, you know, it's like that saying, whatever we resist persists. And I think sometimes and even with the example of rude, we can be so kind of isolated in our thinking that rude only presents in this one way, usually the way that the other person that we're rejecting or judging is presenting as rude, but really getting underneath that and looking at our unique expression of that trait. And so the reason why I'm saying this is because I know, having done a bit of this work on myself, I know the resistance that can come up where you're just like, no, I hate that. Because it's so much easier to be right, you know, and we get so much more out of being right. And so being able to kind of go beneath that and look at how it shows up for you. So you may not be manipulative, for example, in the form of that, you know, lying to people or, you know, doing things like that. But perhaps to your kids, you say, well, if you don't eat dinner, you don't get your ice cream at night. Like, isn't that the same trait in a different way? And so I offer that as an example, because I know that quite a few women listening would be very interested in exploring that. But when it comes to taking full ownership of that trait, there's incredible power in it, but that power is matched with resistance.
Absolutely. And, you know, and I think, you know, it's always that I would say, you know, it applies to most things, except when there is like abuse or narcissism or things 100%. Like that in relationships. Like, that's just, you know, so I say, you know, everyone, like, our mirror and honouring the parts of ourselves, except those in those situations. So
100%. Oh, definitely. And so one of the things that that we were beginning to explore a little bit, and you mentioned this, I'm just trying to remember exactly what it was. You began to say at your introduction, we were talking a little bit about depression, and I know that depression is a really big thing that shows up for a lot of people. So I'd love if we could kind of explore a little bit about how to begin to tell that things like our depression or our anxiety are something that's wanting to come up to be loved, and how shadow work can begin to facilitate that.
I think, the first thing is creating that space between the thoughts that are happening in our mind and the feelings that's happening in our body, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about, they I guess they say mindfulness, don't they? And one thing that I always remember is the breath. So coming back to the breath and taking a breath. A breath is something that can just create that space between what is going on in here and what is going on in here, or what is going on between, what is going on between us wanting to react or not react.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So the first thing I would do is breath, is breathing, is to just really take that breath. And I think, it's also about knowing that you don't have to do it by yourself, knowing that you're not alone. But for me, I think just creating that space initially is the breath. And then once we can start to create that space, and it's about becoming conscious. So a lot of the times with anxiety or with depression, I remember when I had depression, I would have these horrible thoughts, like these horrible visions of me hurting my children, or me dropping my baby, or something like that. And as a mum, that's really scary. And what I started to do was, when I remember this actually this amazing technique I heard in a book, and it's an NLP technique. And for me, it worked. Like, it just worked when I was at that very, very beginning stage. And I remember, it's about visualizing that there's like a tape recorder in your brain. And so one side has like these beautiful positive thoughts, and the other has the negative thoughts that can sometimes just run on like autopilot. And when you can take a breath and you start to become conscious of those, it's about pressing stop on the negative and like play on the positive. And what that does is it's a physical cue for you to stop and become aware of what is currently going on in your mind, and what is currently, leading to you feeling whatever you're feeling within your body. And I always remember that it was just like you stop the negative, and then you start on the positive. And that was a really beautiful way that I started to become conscious of what was going on in my thoughts.
Yeah.
But, in terms of depression and things like that, I think it's not really a one size fits all. It's, I'm kind of not really sure how to answer that. Like, how do you, because it's so different for everyone. It's so different for everyone on their journey. Like, I don't really know how to answer that.
Well, I think that's perfect, because I think that is the answer, is to see it as your own experience and come to know it as your own experience. I think that particularly with certain more clinical based terms like, depression or anxiety, where certain paradigms ask for that to be put in a box, we can tend to separate ourselves from that experience in a way where it has to now match the clinical check boxes. And it reminds me of a book that I read called Circle of Stones, and it's written by a woman who pretty much had a dream about women's circles and was kind of writing about, I'm not explaining this well, just get the book if anyone's listening. It's really good. But she asks the question, like, what if we had a different cultural experience of what it means to be a woman? How would that reframe our current experiences?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our emotional experiences, they have a context. They have a socio, context. We're not existing in a vacuum. And so I think that, we can kind of look at depression as being one way, but this book in particular said, well, what would have been different if you were allowed to be in your depression and there was women around you that gathered and just were with you when you explored the full expression of those depths. And this is, what you're kind of talking about in shadow work, from my understanding of it, you're letting yourself go through the current in order to come through. But I think that because of our interpretation of our own emotional experience based on these other contexts, we stop halfway through. Like we get in and then it gets too uncomfortable and then we come back out and then we have to repeat that journey.
Yeah.
So we're prolonging the state of our own pain because we can't move through it. So it just stagnates and cycles.
And the journey is uncomfortable. It is really uncomfortable. And that's why, why I said, no, we don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I don't think that I would have got to where I am now by doing it all alone. I've had some amazing teachers and I've had some amazing mentors, and I've had, I can remember being up really late by myself at night, sitting there just doing my oracle cards, wanting some guidance. And while I'm at a point now where I know to come back into my body and I've reclaimed that, and I can trust the wisdom of my body when you're just kind of starting out, beautiful tools like oracle cards and things like that can really help you to feel like you're not alone, and to know that you are supported, even if you can't see it or feel it, to know that like these beautiful messages that come through on these cards, you kind of, you feel like there is something out there, that's something supporting you and something holding you. And it's a really beautiful thing until you can come back in and trust that wisdom of your body and honor that wisdom of your body. But I think that, the terms of depression and the terms of anxiety and things like that, and often fear and stuff like that, like what if we changed our anxiety, and what if we changed the way that we see our anxiety as not something bad? What if it's either a warning sign for us that, that our intuition is trying to tell us something that we're not listening to? So our intuition has to get really strong and has to get really, powerful for us to even listen. And then we're still not listening. And then it's like this nodding feeling about intuition going, just hear me. Just hear me.
Yeah, just getting shaking by the shoulders.
And I think, I think one of the most important things in that, and that was the point that you touched on, just having those women around you, having support around you, having, like I said, whether it's a mentor or a guide or a teacher or just a mum or another soul sister that you can message and say, what, I'm having a really hard time. Can you just hold space for me? And it's okay to pay people as well. Like, there's a beautiful energy exchange. So pay to get the healing sessions and, honor their beautiful gifts through the exchange of money. That's just a whole other conversation. But, allowing that energy exchange, because it always has to be an exchange of energy. There always has to be whatever, we are receiving. There always has to be that, allowing someone else to receive as well. So, and I think, that we have kind of become, even though we have this beautiful connection through social media, I think a lot of us have become quite isolated, and we can feel like we are alone. We can feel like we have to do it all ourselves. We can feel like if we don't have this shit figured out, then there's something wrong with us. When half the people that I know and half the people who are successful and half the people who have amazing social media followings still don't have their shit figured out. Like, they still don't know what they're doing. Like, they look like they do, but they still kind of have their beautiful support structures. They still have those people they lean on when, the shit hits the fan or when things get tough, because that's life. Like, life is here to be enjoyed, but it can sometimes really throw you. So I think it's just remembering that it's, it's not an easy journey, and at the same time it is. And when you can get to the place of seeing your anxiety and your depression as a message to let you know that there is something within you that is calling forth. There is something within you that wants to be heard. And that's when we can stop our mind chatter and we can come back into the wisdom of our body, and we can hear what is trying to come through for us. And we can hear the messages and the guidance that our body is trying to share with us. So,
and that's where creating that presence and cultivating that inner connection of stillness is so important, so you can actually hear the wisdom as it's arising.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And I think that we're I've heard it mentioned a lot that a lot of women, and I know a lot of women that I've been talking to, and even myself, this year has been a bit of an interesting year for a lot of women, where a lot of stuff has come up. And so I think this is such a beautifully timed conversation. Do you think that, and I know that you've mentioned in the past that the different shifts in energy that are currently going on at the moment, do you think that that rise of the shadow that's needing to be reclaimed is, kind of parallel to those energy rising?
Yeah, I think that, part of our evolution as a human race, part of our ascension as a human race is really about, honoring all the parts of ourselves. And there is, the shadow work that is currently happening with the earth and happening with the people of the earth, the leaders and stuff like that, what they're doing and things like that is bringing up all this stuff that has for so long been on the undercurrent, that is really confronting to us, but is making us kind of go within ourselves and honor the parts of ourselves. So I've been doing a lot of work personally, and I haven't come out and said this, but I've been doing a lot of work around my white privilege. I know that that is something that has been very present for me at the moment, and it's been really confronting for me to start, unpacking all that and doing that work. And at the same time, I know that I get to do that, and that is part of what I get to do to support the energies of the earth and support the energies of humanity. Because if I do my work, and that's one less person that is contributing to this shadow aspect of the undercurrent of our planet, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%.
So,
and that, yeah.
Yeah, it's and I think as we rise and as we return to our wholeness, the shadow is going to come up. The shadow has to come up, because that is how we reclaim our wholeness, and that is how we come back into our wholeness, by acknowledging and really reclaiming and bringing back all the parts of ourselves. And so, yeah, it's this beautiful dance that we get to do. And I think the more that we deny it, the more that we are, we see these things outside of ourselves happening, and we see these things that are going to trigger us and confront us, until we take that step and do that inner work that we get to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful point to remember, is because sometimes when we see the shadow being reflected to us, we lock on to the fact that it's there, regardless of the fact that it's there. It's there anyway. So the only reason why it's coming up and why we're being triggered by it is because it's ready to be healed in some way. It's that kind of two parts converging to the point of awakening our consciousness to it. And so, really allowing ourselves and giving ourselves permission to see what comes up and be with it long enough for it to transmute out of our own being, as opposed to seeing and then rejecting and fighting its manifestation outward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So, Megan, thank you so much for, coming on and talking to us about this. I know it's such a interesting and sometimes convoluted topic, because there's so many interweaving elements. So,
look at me, I'm all flushed now. I'm all like,
mercy.
I'm like, woo.
So, is there anything that you kind of wanted to say as a way of rounding off this discussion, or something that you felt like we haven't quite addressed that you really felt like you wanted to contribute to the discussion?
I think just to always remember that, we find gold in the darkness. Like when they mine for gold, they find it in the darkness. When we find diamonds, they find them in the darkness. And so I think that, if there is a part of you that is fearing the darkness or fearing the dark, then know that that's an invitation to begin to go into your shadow. And you don't have to go deep straight away, or straight into the guts of it. Start gradually, and like we've said before, just take that first step, and the next step, get some support, and read an amazing book, and start that way, and just start slowly. And know that once you kind of start on the journey, that it's something that you get to keep continuing on with, and it'll be an ongoing process of continual expansion and awareness.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. So thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this discussion. I know that so many women will benefit from it. And if everyone would like to connect with Megan, you can come on over to the show notes at blairiana.com. You can find all the links to her social media and website. So Megan, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, beautiful. Thank you for having me. See you guys. Thank you. Bye.